Today's Wednesday, February 25th. Thanks for joining us for Fire Engineering's Humpday Google Hangout. I'm PJ Norwood. I'm here sitting with my co-partner, Frank Ricci, here from New Haven, Connecticut. We have a great show lined up for you today. We have Steve Marsar from FDNY joining us. Of course, we have the boss in the house, Chief Halton, is joining us. We're going to have a great conversation today. But in order for that conversation to flow, we need your help. We need you to get on Twitter and post some questions for us at hashtag FETalk. And Frank and I, Chief Halton and Steve Marsar, will answer all your questions. So we want to turn it over to Frank, and then he'll kick it to the Chief Halton, and we'll get things started today.
I just want to welcome Steve from FDNY. He's a captain in Manhattan. He's also on the list to make battalion chief, and congratulations on that. And we look forward to your promotion. And you do some great work teaching for fire engineering at FDIC, and hope to see you out there this year. And let's kick it over to the boss who makes this all possible through fire engineering. None of us would be here without him, Bobby Halton. And I just like to say sorry about the loss of your dog today. And once again, you always seem to suffer through personal tragedy, and yet you're here getting the message out with fire engineering. So as firefighters, we appreciate it. Thanks, boss.
Well, it's interesting, and thank you very much for your sympathies. I appreciate it. As most firefighters are huge dog lovers. We lost our 10-year-old golden Chloe this morning. She passed away in her sleep sometime this morning. But beautiful dog, and thank you for that, Frank. But what's interesting is, I think, and as firefighters, I think we know it better than anybody, is that there's a yin and a yang to life. I mean, today is my mom's 90th birthday. So, we're celebrating that incredible, beautiful thing. I mean, 90 years, one of the most beautiful women I've ever known in my entire life. Obviously, I'm a little prejudiced there, but my sainted Irish mother. But and then the loss of a dog in the same day. And I think that's the amazing thing about, I think, our work. I think we're more equipped than most people to deal with personal issues and tragedies, because it goes to the character of the firefighter. So much of what we do on a day-to-day basis has to deal with life and death, and so we're more inclined to hang out with people that we can trust and love, and who are honest and dutiful and loyal, than I think other people. I think other people are more inclined to tolerate bad behavior, lying, cheating, stealing, treachery, than firefighters. We don't tolerate that, and nor should we. And I think that when crises hit, even like the loss of a dog, other firefighters, when they tell you, hey, they're sorry, they mean it. It's not hollow words. It's not, it's not like some snake in the office, or some weasel from produce, or not any disrespect to supermarket workers. I'm sure there's brilliant supermarket workers too, but yeah. Thank you, and no, it's great to be here, and I love. Steve is also a member of our advisory board for fire rescue. Frank left that out in Steve's bio, and an absolute blessing. Before I throw it back to Frank and PJ and start our conversation with Steve, remember FDIC is just 2 months away. About 6 of the hot classes are completely sold out. The other classes are selling very fast. We're expecting about a 15 to 20% increase in our attendance this year, so it's really, really imperative, if you plan on doing hands-on training, that you get your act together this week and start getting your stuff in. So please do that. Remember, we're going to have some incredible special events. You can get to see Frank Ricci once a year. He runs in the Courage and Valor Fun Run, so once a year he puts on a pair of shorts, which is something I really don't think you want to expose your children to. But you get the 5K fun run on Thursday. We've got the Memorial Stair Climb on Friday with the NFFF. We've got Stop, Drop, Rock and Roll comedy night on Tuesday night for the Cancer Firefighter Support Network. We've got the Fools Bash, the Union Party, and that's just a small sampling. The International Instructors Workshop, the International Society of Firefighter Instructors have their annual get-together. The North American Trade Directors, just an amazing amount of things going on. Just such a crowded week, and really looking forward to seeing lots of great folks there. And Steve will be teaching again. Frank is teaching. PJ is teaching. Please come see. These are the smartest guys in the business, and come feel the conversation, feel the energy, feel the passion. there's a lot of misinformation out there these days, and a lot of people creating controversy where it doesn't need to be. I think that when you listen to these guys talk, you'll scratch your head and wonder about those other characters that are out there who don't teach at FDIC. So with that being said, we'll see you at FDIC on the 20th, and it should be a really, really great show. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Steve, I apologize for not mentioning your advisory board position. As a firefighter, we're all life learners, and I just learned there was another magazine out there. So it takes me a little to catch up. I'm a truck guy at heart, so we want to pass it to you. Just tell the audience just quickly a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to move into the survivability profile and the modern fire environment that our firefighters face.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as far as myself, I've been a firefighter in the FDNY for 24 years. I'll have 25 years in August. I've spent the majority of that time in Manhattan, which I think I consider myself lucky to have been able to do that. I got promoted to lieutenant shortly after September 11th, actually the first group after September 11th. At a very difficult time in the department. They asked me to stay in Manhattan because we'd lost so much in seniority and experience. I was glad to do that, and I consider myself, again, lucky to have been able to do that. And then when I became a captain, I got promoted in 2005. Again, I was asked if I would stay. I was like, sure, that's great. And now I'm looking forward to becoming a chief, and we'll see if I get to stay in Manhattan. I hope so. As far as the survivability profiling, I mean, that started with fire engineering with an article in 2009. It stirred a lot of, I'll call it, spirited debate throughout the fire.
We just lost Stephen.
And it's gone full circle. I've had an opportunity to teach at FDIC, and for several years, we've always had a packed house, and it's been a great conversation back and forth. And I think people always say there is a place for safety on the Fireground, obviously, but there seems to be a tendency one extreme or the other. There's the fire service warriors on one end and the safety zealots on the other side, and the reality is in the middle. And I think now, especially when it comes to survivability profiling, it's gone full circle, coming back to the middle, and the UL and NIST studies have helped that a lot because they came after the survivability profiling. So it was a nice package. It tied in together. And the bottom line is most of the people out there that are looking at things and looking to update the way we fight fires, it all comes down to saving firefighters' lives as well as the public. So doing what we've always done, but trying to reduce preventable line-of-duty deaths. And that's what all the organizations, certainly the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, Fire Engineering, Fire Rescue Magazine, all the magazines, Firehouse, they're all trying to save firefighters' lives. So if we can do that, that's reduce preventable line-of-duty deaths, and we all know that they're not all preventable. So there are some that we're not going to be able to prevent, but the ones that we can, there's no excuse not to.
Steve, I can't agree with you more, and I always call it the pendulum of injustice. It seems to go on one end of the extreme, whether it's firefighting or politics, and then the next it goes to the other end of the extreme, and usually we do find the answer in the middle. I've been on both sides of the issue, and I've been teaching, being aggressive while applying the science, trying to make better decisions. One thing that I've been kind of speaking against, and I had a tweet this week that really went out there, was that no unconscious victim has ever been saved by a crew standing on the outside. So it's not to take it to the extreme, though. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We really want to look at the survivability profile. We got to look at our staffing. I had a conversation with somebody from New York City yesterday in my office, and he's a volunteer in Newtown, Connecticut, and he said, there's a difference in how I'm fighting this fire based if I show up in New York or if I show up with my volunteer company and I have 2 people. And he goes, and in the same sense, if I have 6 guys on that volunteer rig, which happens, my tactics are changing to fit that situation as well. So I think you're right on point. We really need to evaluate the situation and have an honest conversation without all that name calling and putting this guy in this category and this in this category. We have a lot more in common than we have apart.
Even those conversations, as difficult as they are to have, and as heated as they sometimes get, they're still necessary. because we do need to talk about that. And I think throughout the National Fire Service, when they look at big cities, the FDNY, Chicago, Boston, they're looking at these big city fire departments, Los Angeles, and we have a luxury of people. That's not the case. There's only, I think, 30 fire departments in the country that respond with more than 2 firefighters on a vehicle. The majority of them are responding with 1, 2, or 3 firefighters, and they can't do what the bigger departments do. And I think that's where some of the younger firefighters are missing. That's a big piece I think is missing. They have to understand that if we can't meet the NFPA standards, which says we're going to have 16 firefighters on scene for an initial attack of a structure fire, and we show up with 4, the tactics have to be drastically different. And the one thing that's come out of the UL studies, the NIST studies, and the survivability profiling is there's never a time where putting water on the fire is wrong. And the NIST studies have already proven that putting water on the fire helps save civilians. If they're in a tenable place before we get there and we put water on the fire, it only gets better. And it makes it safer for us. So in fire departments that are understaffed, and which the majority of them are in this country, even the engine companies in New York City are, and if they're understaffed and they can't do both, there's a time where they really need to look at putting water on the fire and making that a priority, in addition to some of the aggressive searches that need to be done. But let's do it when it's a little safer by at least darkening down the fire somehow.
To quote our old friend and Stephen and I and our old friend Andy Fredericks, God rest his soul, 15 years ago said, the best way to avoid having to jump out of a window is to put the fire out.
Yeah.
Stephen, while I agree with you that staffing is definitely an issue and of concern, I'm showing up. If I get my entire crew department there's 11 firefighters, 10 firefighters, 1 officer, and we're blessed that we have volunteers to back us up, or we couldn't do what we do without the volunteer force. Where the next neighboring town over is New Haven, they're showing up with much greater. Compared to you, what you're showing up on a first due assignment is much greater. However, the job is still the same. We still need to put the fire out. We still need to get water on the fire as quick as possible. And I think that's where the lines get blurred for some people. They are taking a model from a department that may have showing up with 20 or 30 versus a department that's showing up with 4, and they're trying to figure out where do they fit in. How do they decide when they should be putting water on the fire through a window, through an exterior opening, or when they should go inside of an aggressive attack? And I don't think there's one model out there that can truly answer that. But it also brings up the other question, and we'll go back to survivability profiling. When we do put that water in the window, we know that that's lowering the temperatures of that environment, and ultimately it's going to be safer for us. But if there is a victim, and I don't think we know this answer yet, you may have some more information on that, is what is that going to do to that environment? We know it's going to produce steam. So what's ultimately happening to the victim? I look forward to the future studies from NIST and UL that will help further answer those questions for us. But I do think that's always the pressing question when we're talking about exterior fire attack of what about the victim?
And NIST, I was going to say, NIST has addressed that. In one of their studies, they actually did put water in from the outside. They wrapped all the measuring instruments in bunker gear, and they put them in the fire room, outside the fire room, and at the top of a staircase. And we did that also in New York City on the Governor's Island studies. And what they did is they put water on the fire with both solid stream nozzles and fog stream nozzles, which we're not going to get into that argument. But and what they found is, in the shorter version, what they found is that when you're putting water in from the outside, with solid stream nozzles, you're not pushing fire, heat, and smoke. That if somebody was in that environment, they were probably dead beforehand. So that the steam that's generated is not going to hurt them in the fire area, but they're probably already gone at that point, because if it's broken the windows, it's already flashed over. And what they found is that a firefighter in their bunker gear can survive once the fire is darkened down. They can survive the environment that's changing. And what they found is solid stream nozzles do not push fire, heat, and smoke. However, fog streams create steam, but again, they didn't push fire, heat, or smoke, but they did create steam. But again, even with those nozzles, the interesting part is that it didn't create an untenable fire area for the firefighters. And for the civilians, they would also survive if they were outside of the fire room, on a staircase, on a landing with the door open on the second floor, if they survived the smoke conditions. So that's kind of an interesting survey or the outcome of that.
One of the things, and I know PJ and I have been working on these studies since the beginning as well, and that we have to be careful about when we talk about the pushing smoke issue and pushing heat, is that when we talk about the steams that Captain Steve was just talking about, Steve said it very well, they were smoothbore nozzles that were set up so that the airflow was not obstructed from the window and that the water was being deflected and creating like an August rain on the seat of the fire. The thing to remember, and the misinterpretation of some earlier statements, is water won't push fire, but even if you take your smoothbore and whip it around, you can entrain air, and air creates a flow path, and you can push heat and products of combustion by doing that, as you can with a fog nozzle. So early on, people were saying you can't push fire. That was a misinterpretation, which has since been corrected in several articles by NIST researchers. We just published one last week, and Dan Majikowski and several others. So you can move the products of combustion and heat by misapplication of a stream, or by the incorrect use of a stream into the fire area. But the correct use of the stream, as was demonstrated in the Governor Island studies, if you deflect it correctly, off the ceiling and maintain that inflow and outflow of that window, you won't. And the biggest takeaway from all of it is that the temperature drops dramatically, just dramatically. In both cases, in misapplication and correct application, we still drop the temperature.
Thanks, Chief. That's a great point. It was perfectly said. There's a proper application and an improper application, and if you're not hitting it off the ceiling, you're just flowing it into the window. That's not what we're talking about. So thank you for bringing that point up.
Right, and it's important. What people need to remember, it's all about pressure zones, high pressure to low pressure. If you create a high pressure zone, it's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go to the path of least resistance. So if that's superheated gases and superheated air, and you create a high pressure zone, you're going to push it to a low pressure zone. And if it hits the right mix of air and off-gassing of materials, it's going to ignite. So it was one of the problems, and Steve can speak to it probably better than anybody, is that we tend to look for that silver bullet, and it's all or nothing. And people did that with survivability profiling early on. I remember when Stephen and was kind enough to send it to Fire Engineering for us to publish it. We reached out right after he did his EFO paper and said, "Steve, we got to publish this," and he was right on top of it. And we had people grossly misinterpreting what Stephen said. Stephen never said, if you think there's a shot, not to go in. What he was saying was, we know in certain cases there's no shot at all. The only reason, it's interesting, the only gift you have to give away is time. And your life is measured in minutes. It's time. And the only reason you should risk that time is to buy time for somebody else, to help somebody else extend their time. No other reason. There's not a building. I don't care if Pablo Picasso's entire, I don't care if the Velvet Elvis was on fire. Let it freaking burn. But if it's a human being, different story.
Chief, I couldn't agree with you more. And what it comes down to is a properly placed hose stream, whether it's a fog nozzle or smoothbore, the tightest pattern possible, aimed at the ceiling, and put it there and leave it in place. The tests are showing us 15 seconds of water into that environment, bank down off the ceiling, like you so appropriately put it, like the August rain, which I'd say in the Northeast, wish we had those temperatures right now instead of these hundreds of inches of snow. But flowing that water in that room for 15 seconds and then moving it. And with an improperly placed nozzle or hose stream, regardless of the nozzle type, you can move air. That entrained air will move products of combustion and will have negative effects on the environment.
I want to thank Alex Hickory for his question about the fog stream. And Alex, the next time you're operating a line, just open the line up on fog and put your face near it. You'll feel that air entraining right into that nozzle, and that's what's moving the fire. One thing that it seems like we always take this myopic view. We talk about this tactic and this tactic, but everything has to happen in unison. And it's real important that if we're going to talk about putting a line in from the outside, part of that calculation, especially if you're going to make that transfer, as Christine was asking on Twitter, if you're going to make that transition, part of your risk analysis got to be how long is it going to take you from that transition to go in and search, because of what Steve's talking about. The victims don't have that long. So I just saw a video on YouTube, I won't mention the department, but they hit the fire from the outside from the front of the building. They had adequate staffing. And then they took the line and went all the way around the back of the building and hit it from the back, and yet nobody made an attempt to go in and search until the fire was well knocked down. So someone could be right inside the door. We find victims in exit paths and under windows and in bedrooms. So it's got to be part of the same conversation, is how long is it going to take me from this blitz attack to going in and searching once it's tenable.
And I know we're going to get to Steve in a second, but that's the other thing that some miss, that a transitional attack works, but it doesn't solve all the problems. It's going to cool the environment, it's going to slow down the progression, but you still then need to move inside, conduct your searches, and finish putting out the fire.
And before we go to Steve, and Steve, I'd like you to speak on this as well when you answer this question. Not every fire is a ventilation-limited fire. Yes, we want to vet when water's being applied close to the fire and move away when we're venting for fire. But not, and we want to vent in every fire like that. And I stress the instructors that are listening to this today, when you're training your firefighters in the burn buildings for your annual burns, make sure they're venting properly. They're not opening the windows until they're flowing water on the fire, or if they're searching, they're isolating their position. So I think that that's real critical to understand. I'm going to pass this to Steve.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation in the class on Monday. Excuse me, that you know, there's see a fire and they think the right thing to do is to break the windows. Not firefighters, civilians, police officers, things like that. It's happened time and time again. And they say, well, why'd you know, you shouldn't break the windows. Wait till we get there. And they're like, well, why? We see you guys breaking windows all the time. It's like, yeah, we'll get your car off the hydrant and we'll talk about it. But you know, the idea is that we do break windows, but we do it timed correctly, like you said, and we do it with the charged hose line in place, or at least we should be. And the New York City Fire Department, the FDNY, has embraced a lot of the UL studies. You know, they've jumped in feet first. They've done a lot of studies, but they really have embraced it to the point where we are holding off ventilation. We basically are not venting any fire, whether it's fireproof, fire-resistant, or non-fireproof, until there's a charge line in place, either having water on the fire if it's fire-resistant, or at least in the fire area if it's non-fireproof, and only by the order of the inside, usually the first due ladder company officer in New York City. In other places, it might be the pro beyond the nozzle making that decision, which is kind of scary, but you know, somebody on the inside is asking for that ventilation when water is applied. And we can still be doing searches at the same time. That transitional attack, there's no question about it. It's been proven time and time again. There are fire departments out there that are accepting it and making it part of their attack. Not all the time, but if they can't get in the front door and they can't make it down the hallway and they can't get to that apartment, then and it's within reach of a hose stream, that's a option for them, as opposed to fighting their way in there, getting blown out the front door, and burning the place to the ground. So there is a place for that. The transitional attack is excellent. It's an excellent tool in the toolbox. It's a huge option for us, and we're learning tactics now that we've always thought were right. In the 50s and 60s, they did put water in from the outside because they couldn't go in. They didn't have SCBAs. And then they would go in as far as they could after that. They'd make that transitional. We got out of that because of the gear and the equipment we have. Now we've gone full circle because science is telling us that unfortunately we've killed a lot of firefighters by not updating our tactics. So, and I for the instructors out there, if you start out any of your classes by saying that fires have changed, you need to cut that out, because it hasn't changed for our new firefighters. It's changed for us old guys that have been around a while. The new firefighters, they're coming into the fire service with flashovers happening within 3 to 4 minutes. That's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with transitional attacks as a viable option. They're dealing with flow paths and things like that, the fuels that we're dealing with today. And I think that's they have that opportunity that it hasn't changed for them. So let's stop saying that. Let's just say this is the way fires are today. It's not our daddy's or granddaddy's fire department anymore. And they can still do everything we've done. They can still get dirty. They can crawl around. They can take out windows when it's right. They can stretch hose lines. They can do their primary searches. all that stuff can still be done, and that's important. But I think we have smarter firefighters today than we've ever had, and more intelligent firefighters, better educated firefighters, and that's why we're able to move forward now, because we're still using tactics in many cases that were developed in the 60s and 70s. But we all say fires have changed. Then why are we using the same tactics? And that's where we're going. This is the first time in our history we're going to be able to update the way we do it, and it's a very exciting time for instructors, the FDIC. It's a huge opportunity, and it's an exciting time for the younger firefighters, because they're going to see a big update in a short amount of time, and it's already happening, which is pretty exciting.
And if I could back Steve up on a couple of those points, the FDIC has always kind of been at the cutting edge. So here's a class that was presented called Pretty Plastics, Ugly Fires by a fellow named D.L. Bretling, who was a UL guy, one of those UL guys. And unless you were at that lecture, then the fires aren't new to you, today's fires. This is from 1954. 1954. I'm probably the only person who was around then, out of this crowd, and probably out of most of our audience. But even I wasn't fighting fire yet then. So that's when we, So the other thing to be careful too, and in your classrooms, I hear people say all the time, fires are hotter. They're not any hotter. The laws of physics haven't changed. They're not hotter. They're faster and they're bigger, but they're not hotter. So there's some stuff there. There was an interesting thing that Stephen said too that I'd like to chime in on. Remember, if you're going with a vent-limited fire and you open the door, you take your size 13 door opener and put it to the front door, and you open the door, now you've vented that fire. Now the cool air gravity currents are coming in low, the hot air is coming out high, and what you have to do is move that line fast enough to get to that seat of that fire, because what's going to happen is that air is going to go feed that fire is going to grow, and what you want to try to do is get to it before it lights up enough of those gases that are exiting out and traps you in the chimney, so to speak, because you'll have that bidirectional path, but if you get enough energy being generated in that fire, you can end up in the mouth of the dragon with that fire, hopefully forcing you out, but a catastrophic end. That's why we talk so much about door control. And another fascinating lecture I can't wait to visit with Mike Reich out of Germany. He's going to be talking about curtains, which is a new tactic, and I know to swing it a little bit towards PJ and Frank, you guys have played with them, right?
Okay. Yeah, Chief, we have. Frank and I wrote an article. We did a live fire and acquired structure in Newtown, Connecticut for the Sandy Hook Fire Department, which we all unfortunately know for not so great things that's happened in the history of that town and city. So Frank and I, along with Justin McCarthy, another group of great firefighters, we went up there with the support of Tempest, and we used some curtains, and we played with them. We played with controlling the air into the environment, and we saw great results from, especially for departments like mine that we struggle with staffing. We struggle. We'll have one or two firefighters making a stretch, and that's it. We don't have those, those door control guys, or we don't have a firefighter to chase the kinks. So it works really, really well for smaller departments like ours. I do think more testing needs to be done. This was, one acquired structure, right, one live burn, one test that we saw good results from. But I don't know if I would put my name on that they're good for the entire fire service. But I've spoken to Michael as well on numerous occasions, and they have great success across the pond with them. So they're definitely a valuable tool that we should be looking at for the fire service as we move forward.
Yeah, and I was impressed with the Tempest curtains, and they have their place. I really like having that control firefighter controlling the door and pushing the line in, because we all know if you want to facilitate a clean stretch, having that individual at the door is probably the quickest and most important person to get that line in. It may not be the glory job, but it's probably the most important to facilitate that stretch. So I like the control firefighter, but if you don't have the control firefighter, the curtain is a viable option, and I also like it in multiple dwellings as a smoke control device, which I was really impressed with the ability for it to hold smoke. If you're, we all like to say that we're going to designate an attack stair and an evacuation stair. However, we know that our operational realities are people are going to be coming down both stairs. So putting that curtain up in the attack stairs makes a big difference. So I think that even in the urban departments, the curtains have a impact. Just to address a couple of our questions on Twitter here, ventilation isn't so much an art, It's a science, and FDNY and other departments across the country, New Haven and Tulsa, Oklahoma, we were doing it right before our protective clothing made us kind of get a little sloppy and a little complacent. We were waiting for them to put water on the fire before venting the window close to the fire and moving back. So if you want ventilation simplified, when venting for fire, wait until the line has water, the line's in place, and the officer calls for water, break the window as close to the fire as possible, and then work your way back. When venting for life, where you're searching, you have to be able to isolate your location. So if you're doing VES, you're going to go in. Of course, you're going to sweep the floor. You created a flow path. You're going to go close the door first and search back. If you're inside the building, and this is what I've been really, PJ, Justin McCarthy, Duffy, Avila, we've been trying since 2006 to really push this, is the fire didn't get the memo whether you VES or whether you entered from the inside. If you're searching and you break the window in the bedroom, it's the same thing as VES, but you went right by the door. So what we've been teaching is if you're doing a conventional search and you're going to take a window, isolate your position. So yes, that means if you're searching a living room or a kitchen in 99% of the homes we go to, you can't vet for life. You just can't do it because there's no way to isolate it. You got to eat it a little bit and let them get water on the fire. You can isolate, close the door. We've seen firsthand how even a hollow core door makes a big difference. And Bobby, so eloquently was talking about door control. Door control is very important. Let's pass this over to our captain here, Steve.
Just one of the surprise, we have Deputy Chief George Healy and Captain John Cirillo from the New York City Fire Department that were intimately involved with the studies in New York that UL and NIST did. And when it came to ventilation, I asked, when it first happened, before they really put all the answers together, I asked Chief Healy, I was like, so what was the big aha that came out of it? And he said one of the surprises for him, and it was a surprise for most people, was that, to answer Christine's question, even vertical venting in the old days where cutting a roof was done initially in a private house, unless it was a basement fire, was a pretty standard tactic in a lot of departments if they had people to do it. But like Chief Healy said, the problem with that is we let the heat, gases, and everything else out of that opening, but it has to be replaced by something. And now we know it's getting replaced with cool, clean air, which actually feeds the fire. So even that was the big surprise. One of the big surprises that came out of that study was that, and even in South Carolina, the studies that were done down there, that was a little bit of a surprise. That even the vertical venting, that air, the bad stuff that comes out has to be replaced by something else, and the good stuff that comes in without having water on the fire is going to actually feed the fire and help it to grow faster. So that's something to consider, both for firefighter and victim safety.
And part of what we found, Steve, is it goes back again to high pressure to low pressure. When we were doing the vertical vent studies, what we saw was that the temperature increased, because remember, none of these buildings are 100% sealed. I mean, it's not like you're working in a vacuum. You're working in a building that has all kinds of drafts and all kinds of oxygen supplies. So as you open it, the hot air starts going out. Again, cool air gravity currents at the lower level start, and they start to feed that fire because now it's got a flue. A good friend of mine, Ted Nee, for years, starting back in the FDIC, back in, the early, mid-'90s, he used to laugh because huge fire behavior guy. He did the Fire Dynamics DVD with John and Dan Majikowski, available with Fire Engineering books and video. Shameless plug. But anyway, great DVD. Seriously, if people don't have it, let me just... This is the Fire Dynamics video, and it's Dan Majikowski, John Cirillo, and Ted Nee. And Ted used to make a joke, and for years in our class we used to use it. We used to say the guys in Albuquerque, we would send the truck guys would get up on the roof as fast as they could, cut a hole in the roof, and then rappel in. And people would look at us and go, "The heck are you talking about? All the heat's coming out there." It's like, and we would look at them and say, "It's the same thing when you open the door." It's just so when we talk about horizontal and vertical ventilation, remember we're talking about energy, and if the ceiling is high pressure and it can't vent, it's going to vent horizontally. When you take it vertically, it's going to vent vertically, and your temperature is going to increase. It just is. So fascinating find, and I think that was among one of the many fascinating finds that came out of that particular piece of the study. But and I hate to interrupt PJ and Frank's show, but a question that I always wanted to throw at Steve, and I just thought of it while we were sitting here, is that one of the other things we saw at the studies was if the door was closed on a bedroom, and you could have a roaring fire ripping in the bedroom next to it or in the living room, if the door was closed in the bedroom, the survivability profile for that individual, which I think is a wonderful term, and it's great to have the man who actually coined it sitting on the. Every now and then you get so many people who claim to have coined something, but we actually know this is the man who coined that term. The profile for those people goes through the roof if that door is closed. And there was an interesting article that a young man wrote the other day about maybe one of the things we need to start teaching people to do is to close their bedroom doors at night, and it increases their survivability exponentially, which is interesting because I never slept with my bedroom door closed. I've always had it open, and after reading that article, I thought, boy, maybe, duh, close the door.
Chief, before we get back to Steve, Mike Alt has put out that flyer last week on the fire engineering training community, which I think is great about closing the door. And I think that gets to a whole nother conversation on public fire education and our message. Where is our message in public fire education today? Are we still teaching, our kindergartners to feel the back of the door at the back of their hand? Well, where is our message? And I really hate to get into that discussion because that's a whole 2-hour discussion. But I think we really need to look at our public fire education. And I agree, closing the door. And I tell you, it was a fight for me to convince my wife to shut the door to my daughter's bedroom because we may not hear her at night. My daughter really quickly learned if we don't hear her, she's going to get up, come to the door, and then come in our room and wake us up. It is an argument. It's something that we have to address, and that comes down to what is our message in public fire education. And maybe, Frank, we can look at that for a future show because there's some really good people. Michael, Becky White are some of the folks that are really doing some great things with that now that we maybe can bring on in a future show.
And just for our company officers out there and firefighters who do the safety tours in the firehouse, what I always used to do is take the kindergartners and get them huddled around when the chief would walk in, and I'd say, hey, can I tell you a secret? And they love secrets, and I would say that the chief's afraid of the dark, and when he goes to sleep at night, he uses a nightlight, and that's why he can keep the door closed. And it just kind of, they giggle, they laugh, and it's just kind of a fun way to get the kids a little engaged of, you ask them how many of them sleep with their door closed, and it's only probably 25%, at least in my experience. This isn't a scientific study by any means, but in my experience, it's only about 25% of the kids that you expect. One thing for our truck company guys out there that I want to simplify what Bobby was saying about high pressure and low pressure. You can do a great practical demonstration. I try to do it on a nightly basis. I tweeted it out. Bobby knows where I'm going, but it works. Take a beer can and drink from the beer can, and always be responsible. Make sure you have a designated driver. Brought to you by Fire Engineering. And then take the same beer can and pop a hole in the top of the beer can and drink it, and you'll see it comes out much quicker. Or when you're filling your snowblower or your lawnmower, do the same thing. Keep that top on the back, fill it up, and then take it off, and you'll see how much quicker the gas comes out because you're having the air push it through. So air coming in, air going out.
And interestingly enough, for my fellow non-drinkers out there, I'm not a drinker, you can do the same thing with a can of soda.
Bite your tongue.
Probably wouldn't know that because that's a whole other discussion we can have about that.
It's that couch thing we talked about before the show.
Kind of getting on track a little bit. With closing the door and Steve having the opportunity of having you on the show today talking about survivability profiling, but also going to the whole closing the door on public fire education. I foresee, and I know Frank doesn't like this terminology, the VEIS, today's VES, and that frustrates him when I throw that I in there. So kind of do that on purpose.
VES sounds so much better.
It's VEIS. It's the only thing we'll print in fire engineering. VEIS.
So I foresee that firefighters in coming up, we're going to be making a lot more rescues and a lot more grabs if our public fire education message is on with closing the door, but that highlights the importance of being in the right place, performing a vent enter isolate search properly, and shutting that door. So as a ladder captain in Manhattan, talk to us about some of those challenges. And one of the questions that came up is regarding hoarding fires and increased contents in the environments. And maybe you could kind of address that at the same time for us.
Yeah, actually, Christine asked that about the hoarder residents, which everybody deals with, it seems now. But there was something you said before that. The door. The FDNY has been doing that. There's companies that have been, ladder companies that have been doing it for ages, always leaving a person at the door. I had a lieutenant, Vernon Richard, who got killed on September 11th, posthumously promoted to captain. He did it all the time. When I was a young firefighter, he was like, all right, one of you has to stay by the door, and it was usually the can position in the FDNY, and he would leave us at the door, and they would go and do a search. You could yell to them. It builds confidence in the search. I think now I've gone full circle. My company, Ladder 2, just Monday night, I think it was out at the Fire Academy in New York City, and that's what they did. They did searches. It was a search drill, leaving a person at the door. So we're trying to drill it into our ladder companies' heads that leaving that person at the door is a good thing. It builds confidence in the search team. They can actually search further, quicker, because if they don't have to worry about keeping their orientation, although they do, but they don't have to worry so much because that firefighter can yell to them and make noise and always get them back if they need to. They can open the door and let the engine in. They're at the door. They can control that door. They're controlling the flow path, and that's all good. I think what I try and do is nobody wants to be that firefighter at the door. So I think what I'd like to do is if I have the thermal imaging camera and it's working, I'd rather stay at the door. Let the firefighters go out there. Let them do the searches. Leave me at the door with the thermal image camera, which is a supervisory tool, and I can direct their searches. I can tell them there's a kitchen to the left, the couch is on fire in front of us, there might be a bedroom to the right, go to the right. The couch is in front of us, I can see it. The line's coming, go left, go right. So I think that's something for the company officers to consider. When you're leaving somebody at the door, maybe the company officer should be that person. Again, nobody wants to be that person, but somebody's got to bite the bullet. And as a supervisory position, it's actually a great place to be, I think. It's not, that's just my opinion, of course.
And what we teach is we leave the person at the door, but we teach them to close the door, because if they vent the window, then you're not creating that flow path, and then the boss opens the door. But I agree, if the camera's working and you're the boss, guide your firefighter around. And just as us guys are getting older and girls are getting older out there, it's great because your firefighters are working more. They'll run out of air before you do. You look like a hero. They'll think you got it all figured out. You're just not working as hard as them. But really, once you get overly tactically involved as the boss, you lose perspective. I don't care who you are, how much experience you have. If you're doing too much of the work as the boss, you're not supervising. And that's one of the problems in the fire service with lack of staffing, is we have far too many working bosses where they have to work in order to safely, efficiently, and effectively fight the fire. But if you have the staffing and you have the personnel, your firefighters want to grow. Let them do the search and direct it. I agree with you 100%, Steve.
And Steve, the other point that I think we need to make is when we talk VEIS, I think we're putting such an emphasis on closing the door. I fear that too many of the new members are going to be coming in that bedroom and closing that door and forgetting to check the hallway behind that door. I have no issues with them coming in that room, closing that door, but keeping their hand on the door, then slowly opening it and making sure that they take a look in the hallway, because we know that's where we're going to find our victims. And the other thing I'd like you to discuss is when you're that officer and you're in that hallway and you're guiding your company, how do you direct which way for them to go? I feel a good way is numbering the walls. Something I learned from a friend of mine, Sean Gray. He numbers the walls 1, 2, 3, 4, or Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, similar to the way we identify the sides of the building. So he'll stay in the hallway the same as you're talking about, but he'll number the walls so he can give his company members direction on which way to go. So if he sees somebody in the far right-hand corner, he just say, hey, I want you to go to the 2-3 corner. We have a victim there. Or you have another door off the 3 wall or the Charlie wall going maybe to another bedroom or to a bathroom. How do you address those issues?
I don't think it's done routinely. We talk about right and left. We do use exposures 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of A, B, C, D like the rest of the country. But we would probably use exposures. I think in most places we would use the exposures, or just simple left and right. I think it's difficult when you're training all the time. You got to keep it simple. And when we start getting into sectors and the A side, B side, the D sector or the B side or A side or 1, 2, 3 side, it can get a little confusing for the firefighters. But if you do it all the time and you drill on it, you practice it, it's second nature, so it's no big deal. But I think in New York City we don't do it that complicated. We try and keep it much more simple than that. Left, right, exposure 1 or 2 or 4 or something like that. And just if I could mention something with Christine about hoarder homes, because I was just teaching a class recently where a lieutenant did survivability profiling. The next day, the lieutenant went out on an EMS run. They found a hoarder home. They sent it through the chain of command to warn everybody about it. They put it in their dispatch information for everybody forever that ever goes to that home, as long as the people are living there. And he took it one step further. That lieutenant, not only did he put it in writing through the chain of command to notify everybody about it immediately, he also tried to educate the homeowners about how bad it was for them and the fire department to have those conditions, and the chance of them having a fire are greater. Christine asked about would we consider using search ropes in heavy content areas. Hoarder homes, they're dangerous no matter what. The problem with search ropes, well, with or without search ropes, is if some of that stuff falls down in that little aisleway that you're trying to traverse, if that stuff falls on the search rope, that search rope, it's going to get you to that point, and that's about it. But the search ropes certainly are a tool that's underutilized. It's a basic tool that requires advanced techniques, but I think we should use them more often. And that's a case where if we do get on the fire side of that pile that falls down, and the other rapid intervention team can come in and be on the other side, at least now they know where we are. So I think the search ropes are a great idea in pretty much all kinds of, unless you have a really small home, private residence, the search ropes I think should be utilized a lot more.
Steve, and then I'll throw it to Bobby. On the hoarding situation, address some of Christine's concerns is a lot of times it's going to be very difficult to move around in there, and the thermal imaging camera is something that could help in that situation with the person maybe buried, and you're not going to be able to see around objects. But one of the things that I think is key in a hoarding home, and you can have this in any jurisdiction, is you have to communicate as soon as you find it, because the incident commander outside or the chief of operations may not understand that there's a hoarding situation. Something that we have in New Haven, we have a lot of 3 woods and 2.5 woods, is individuals put their wash machine in the back staircase or the refrigerator in the back staircase. Now, I have no problem with my personnel going over or going around the refrigerator to put out the fire, but they got a radio out to command that they have an obstruction so we can get another company to clear it. Don't wait until you get jammed up and then say you're in a hoarding situation. The tactics are going to have to change based off the risk. So if you're doing something that's going to be a higher risk, that needs to be communicated, and then maybe we can take arrangements. I want to just go back to VES real quick, because this is something that I learned through going to FDIC and watching that video from Indianapolis, and where they VES, and the officer, he made the right call in my opinion. He had a report that the victim was in that room. He got to the door and he wasn't able to shut it, and he ended up bailing out. So I'm not calling a shot on the tactic at all. It was save a lot, risk a lot. But one thing I learned from watching that video, putting in the NIST stuff that I didn't think about before, is a lot of our residential deaths occur in 2-story homes in America. So if you're going to go VEIS in that location, before having the NIST understanding, I would have just took the ladder like they did in that incident and break out the window, put on your mask, go up and get in. And now that we see that that flow path is traveling just in those NIST studies, 15 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, is that if you climb all the way up to the window, put in your mask, and then break it out, that might give you 15 extra seconds or 10 extra. It may only be 5 extra seconds, but those 5 extra seconds might be enough to actually close the door to make the search tenable. So that was something that I learned from FDIC that now I teach is, hey, don't just clear the window with the ladder if it's a high-risk VEIS. Get up there, make sure all your PPE's on, break out the window, do a quick sweep. We don't want to take a rescue and turn it into a recovery. I got a whole class of 44 people. Half of them are previously trained. Every time they go in a window, they're slamming that concrete. I'm going to put a pumpkin under there to kind of drive the point home. It's like you got to sweep. We find victims under the windows, guys and girls. So I'll go back to Bobby, and then we'll kick it back to Steve.
Well, just to clear up some misconceptions about that particular Indianapolis fire, Captain Van Sant's a friend of mine, and the angle of the camera, and Doc Brown, who shot the video, is a friend of mine. The angle of the camera made it look like the fire was much more involved in that room than it was. After he did that search, the bed was right under the window too. So that's another reason why he's coming out the way he did. He had a lot more time than the way that particular video portrays it. A lot of it had to do with the camera angle, and I've spoken to everybody who was there, including the captain himself. So just to clear that up, we're talking about one of the most tactically competent fire departments on the face of the planet when you're talking about the IFD. I think second probably only to Boston, and then maybe third to New York City, but New York City.
We're a work in progress, 150 years strong.
There you go.
Cheer.
So, but when we're looking at fire conditions and you're looking at making decisions to do certain tactics, it's always a time relationship that you need to play into it. And Frank said a very interesting thing earlier about when the officer gets too involved in tactics or too involved in task level activities, they take their eye off the tactical picture. Well, we only have so much working memory. If you want to read a great book on it, it's called The Overflowing Brain. It talks about how much working memory we have. Under stress, we have even less working memory. So when you're in a high stress situation like that, the fewer things you can do to occupy your working memory, the better, especially if you're the company officer. If you can keep a kind of a broader focus, it's very beneficial to the crew and to the survivability of the crew. So that being said, I think when we talk about VES or VEIS, as I like to call it, getting the door closed as quickly as possible, if possible. Many times when you go into these bedrooms and these hoarder situations, or even just your typical high schooler's bedroom, there could be obstructions. You don't have time to pick up the laundry or move the basket. And when Frank was talking about anytime we have an egress point that is compromised for any reason, refrigerator, washing machine, keg, whatever it might be there, it's always best to try to remove it if possible. If not, to let the companies know, because one of the most important things, and Stephen can speak to it very eloquently, as in the FDNY, they always make sure that the access and egress is not impeded in any way by tools, equipment, storage, etc., etc. So if you can clear those spaces, especially if you have fire behavior near those locations, really important thing to do. If not, important that everybody knows. So a couple of great points. What an incredible discussion.
Bobby, there's a question for you online that we want to throw to you. It says, Bobby, are split levels still causing problems, or have fire departments figured it out? And it's from Art. So if you want to opine.
No, and I think Steve can talk to him too. I mean, split levels are a huge issue, especially when we talk about, well, your neck of the woods back east. The split level construction was extremely popular from the early mid 40s to the late 70s. It was a very popular building style. And what a split level means is you'll come into a home and either the living room will be elevated slightly and then the bedrooms will be up off the living room, or you'll come in and the living room will be lower, and huge issues for us there in terms of when we're taking crews in for trip and fall hazards, but also when we're talking, particularly, and Stephen probably talked to this as well, one of the problems you have with a split level is that the living room area is going to be up a small flight of stairs, a short flight. We used to call them a short flight, so 3 to 4 steps. But the smoke and process of combustion, because in a split level, generally that living room area will have this vaulted ceiling. Tremendous amount of process of combustion can be contained in that space. Much like if you think about the Precious Faith fire, 1999 in Lake Worth, Texas, or if you think about the Southwest Supermarket fire in Phoenix, Arizona. So you've got this void that's got this tremendous amount of superheated gases and energy that's elevated, but when you come in the front door, because of that there's that huge area for process of combustion, very deceptive fires. And I know Stephen's been on hundreds of them as well. Very, very deceptive fires. So we're still having a lot of issues with split-level houses, and now it's become even more difficult for us because now we're seeing what we call divided private dwellings. So given the country's current economy over the last 20 years, really, of just failed leadership, I'll just throw that in there for a little quick political statement, and I mean failed leadership in the broad spectrum, we see a lot of divided private dwellings. And oftentimes that in a split-level private dwelling, you'll have this void space that's now separated by a wall that the people may have put in after the fact with a separate entranceway off the back or the side. So huge issues. We could spend a day and a half talking about split levels, which is one of my passions. So
Chief, I agree. We have a lot of split levels in Connecticut, especially in my jurisdiction that we deal with, and they are a problematic fire. But I know we're coming up to our hour point, so I want to turn it back to Steve and maybe give him a chance to kind of go back, clear up a few things, maybe answer a few questions that he hasn't had the opportunity to.
Thank you. For Art, with the split levels, I think one of the things that's helping now is hopefully a vast majority of fire departments are going back to a 360-degree size-up. It's cited in every NIST and NIOSH report of fatal fires or near miss fires. Billy Goldfeder does it all the time, where lack of a 360-degree size-up is a big problem. And I think with split-level homes, that's a key. You need to know where the fire is before you can start commit people to it. The rules of engagement for structural firefighters by the IFC addresses that. One of the rules is that the incident commander or first officer on the scene, one of their first responsibilities after calling for help is to make sure that they do a 360-degree size-up, which will help in those kind of situations. Go ahead.
Steve, just a word of caution, because I teach a lot about the 360, and again, you know, the answer is usually in the middle. In my department, for me to do a 360 when I pull up, I got to fake out a dog, break down a fence, and then possibly get mugged in the backyard. So, yes, someone needs to get a look at the rear of the building, but the incident commander and the first line company don't need to be holding hands, walking around the building together while the fire is getting bigger. So the answer is somewhere in the middle there. We need to make sure that we get a look at the rear. If we can't in a row-type structure or tenement, the report comes from the roof, but we need to make sure that we get a look at the rear of the building quickly and we radio that information to the crews. But I hate seeing and hearing companies say, well, if the battalion chief and I arrive at the same time and I'm the engine boss, I'm making a 360 with them. And in some of these houses, you know, in the Republican ghetto, that could be a 20-minute walk around some of these mansions. So there's got to be a balance between what's going on. It sounds great to say 360, 360, but it's not always going to reflect our operational realities. And before I pass it to PJ and Bobby, one thing I'd like to say is I believe in the science. The science is going to make us better firefighters. I believe in the work that you're doing for Survivability Profile is key. Keep it up. It's great work. We need to look at, you know, are we risking our lives to save for a recovery? So all that's very important. But we need to also put in perspective, not every fire is vent limited. For the last 40 years, we lose approximately 20 firefighters as an order of magnitude in structure fires. So we want to use the science to make ourselves safer. We want proper staffing. We want to make sure we call for the help we need. Everybody wants to go to your fire. There's no politician on scene that says you can't call for the help you need when you get there. So have the political courage to pick up the radio and call for the help so that you can not be forced to fight a fire incrementally. But in this country, more people are killed by deer each year than we're losing in fires. So this is a wake-up call that, yes, we are losing people in fires. 20 a year is too many, but we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We still got to go in and search. If we think that there's a survivable person inside and we're making that exterior attack, you got to do that risk analysis to say, okay, I need to transition to get in to get them. It's not just about putting water on from the outside. So I'll go to Bobby on that one.
Well, I think that's a great point, but I think also one of the things that, and Stephen's work is landmark in this, is that what we really need to be keyed on, in my opinion, is civilian deaths. In other words, and people have the audacity, in my opinion, oftentimes to say things like America has the third worst fire deaths of all industrialized nations. Well, America is actually about 50 times larger than most other industrialized nations as well. Most other industrialized nations are about as big as an individual state. So if we do it state by state and we look at how some of the states are faring compared to some of the people we're compared to, most commonly we get compared to Sweden, which I think has a civilian fatality rate of, I believe it's like 13 people for every 100,000 fires or something like that. Well, that's about the equivalent of the state of California. But if you look at a similar population size, you look at like the state of Rhode Island, which is similar in population to Sweden. I think Rhode Island's civilian casualty rate, last time I checked, and I could be wrong, was somewhere around 2 or 3 people for every 100,000 fires. So they're doing a whole lot better than our friends the Swedes. But people don't do that, and so. But that's the statistic that I think that Stephen's work is so landmark in helping us to understand. It's the mission. The mission is to save lives and protect property. Our own lives absolutely are just as important as the civilian lives. I'm not diminishing that. But what I'm saying is that the focus, the only reason, as I said in the beginning, to risk your life is to buy time for somebody else. If you're going to be willing to trade the time you have left for anything, make sure it's to buy time for somebody who's survivable, as Stephen's work has so eloquently pointed out. And I think that if you haven't read Survivability Profiling by Captain Marsar, it's on fireengineering.com. Just put in Survivability Profiling. You can read it for free. You can download it. Take a look at it. But read it. I mean, don't make an opinion based upon what someone else has told you or what you've heard. Too often we take the easy way out in terms of getting our information. Either we watch one news station or we listen to one group of voices, and we decide that that's the way it is, when nothing could be further from the truth sometimes, and a little bit of investigation will lead us to much better conclusions. I think one of my favorite quotes of all time came from Thomas Jefferson, who, as John Kennedy so eloquently pointed out, Kennedy was having dinner with his staff one night in the White House, and he said he never thought there was more brain power in the White House at any given time, except for perhaps when Jefferson ate alone. But Jefferson once said, "Question boldly even the existence of a God, for if there be one, wouldn't he be more grateful for the homage of reason than blindfolded fear?" And what he meant by that was, don't take anybody's word for it. Whether it's, I don't care if it's Steve and UL or me and Frank or Captain Marsar, do your homework, look at your experience, look at your knowledge, weigh it, look at the different sources, and the science is never settled. That's the other thing. Remember, so it's Stephen and Danny and all the great guys at Pravin and Tom and all the great guys you all are doing. They're just getting us data. They're not telling you how to fight fires. Yeah, they're putting out some tactical options and some considerations to think about, but they're not saying you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way. Well, what they're saying is, take the IFSI course. Come to FDIC. There's still some, not a lot. It's almost full. There's still some slots left in that workshop. Take the class. Brian Kaz and the gang, they're not telling anybody how to do anything. They're saying, here are some options based upon the data. Here are some options based upon history. You pick what works best for you. What's going to work best for Frank is different than what's going to work best for PJ. And I'm a training officer here at the Limestone Fire Protection District number 2, where we have 2 paid guys on duty during the day, and we're 100% volunteer at night. So it's always, our tactical options are always going to be driven by manpower, conditions, and resources, and time constraints. So you've got to just learn how to deal with it and go with the flow, and have an open mind and an open heart, and don't demean anybody for disagreeing with you, and don't agree with people just because you think they're smart people. You want to know how often I'm wrong? I'll get my home phone number is 918-371-2188. That's my real home cell. Call my wife right now. I'm wrong. I'm wrong from the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed most days. On a good day, I'm right once. So I could be completely wrong in this statement, but do your homework, and just because you disagree with somebody doesn't make them a bad person. It really doesn't. My best friend in the whole world is Chief Bernasini, and politically we've got about as much in common as a walnut and a grapefruit. But we love each other, absolutely love each other. And
Chief, Chief, I couldn't agree with you more. we're want to turn it over to Steven. Give him a minute
We
to.
can go a little over. Don't worry about it.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
pay
I was
the
gonna
bills. I got a checkbook.
Okay, good.
You wrote it in pencil, though.
Yeah, with an eraser.
So Cap, let's go back to you. Let's give you an opportunity to finish things up. Talk a little bit about, and you said something in our original conversations, and it kind of goes along with what Chief Hunt was just saying. Is you're talking about an informed, intelligent, and coordinated attack. And I think that goes to the whole host of the fire service today. Don't just take a tweet or don't just take a Facebook post and carve it into stone and make it your tactics. Become good, informed, intelligent firefighters and make the right decisions for your fire with your resources that you're standing in front of fighting today. So I think that says a lot to what you were talking about. You were going towards the interior versus exterior argument there, but I'll give you a quick minute to talk about that, wrap things up a little bit, and have anything else you want to add to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. One thing that I always say in the classes that I teach with the survivability profiling thing is, listen, Steve Marsar from the New York City Fire Department is not saying we should surround and drown buildings. First of all, I'd get thrown out of the New York City Fire Department and never be allowed back in anything. So that's not what I'm saying at all. One of my executive fire officer papers was on this, obviously, and some of the recommendations were adopted by the FDNY. And last year, the New York Times article did an article on it, and they actually asked our former fire commissioner, Sal Casano, because the New York City was celebrating the lowest fire deaths we've had in the history, our 150-year history. And it had a lot to do with our building inspections, the fire prevention programs that are being done, and the firefighting, the way we're doing it. And it was a nice pat on the back. And, of course, they were trying to beat the drum about it because it's a significant milestone. And then the reporter, without talking to me, asked the commissioner, he said, hey, this captain did this whole thing and survey and research project, and he said, he mentioned that this aggressive interior attack, may need to be changed. And the commissioner, who I consider to be a friend of mine, said, yeah, that's never going to happen. And what I was saying was, in New York City anyway, that we should take that out of all our training books, as I think it has gotten people killed. It has saved a lot of people, on the other hand, civilian-wise, but it's killed a lot of firefighters where there were no civilians to be saved. So what I had said was maybe we should rename the aggressive interior attack to what the chief said, to something to the effect of like an informed, intelligent, and coordinated attack that's not always aggressive and not always interior, or some combination of the two. And that's all I said. I wasn't saying that we should get away from that tactic, because it's worked well for us for 150 years now. So that's kind of what that is, and I admire the people who are willing to stand up and have a discussion on these points, like Chief Halton said. It's important, and having a discussion is what's going to save firefighters' lives, because it gets people to think. That 360-degree size-up, by the way, the IFC rules of engagement say not that the incident commander has to do it, but he has to get it. And in New York City, we do the same thing. It's possibly by the roof firefighter, either on the floor above or on the roof. And I tried to do it in my volunteer fire department as fire chief. I tried doing 360-degree size-ups, and it's much more difficult than it looks like on paper, like you pointed out, for all the same reasons. And so I realize it's much harder to do than it looks on paper. But Gary Morris, the chief from out west, who really works hard on those rules of engagement, he was the one who put that in there over many times. But like you said, it's not easy, and it doesn't have to be done by the incident commander.
I want to end on a last note here, and it's totally away from the conversation, but it's a good leadership point, and I think it's a proper forum because we have a lot of listeners. Yesterday I was passed over as the acting director of training. I'm the department's drill master, and it refers back to my FDIC speech. My phone blew up last night. I mean, my house phone, my cell phone, don't do anything for that fire department. Watch the news, shut your office door, go to sleep, get out of training. I mean, and the support was overwhelming, but my answer was the same. That doesn't punish the politicians who made a decision based off politics over safety. That only punishes the guy next to you or the girl next to you. So remember, in your career, how you handle adversity is what's going to define you, and bad things are going to happen to you in this fire department, any fire department, and you got to realize that in life you have to handle disappointment. You got to push by it, and I'll support the person that's in that position because I'm not going to endanger any of my members, and I'm going to be. It's still my class. I am the drill master, and I'm going to run things the way I run things regardless. But the fact is, I'm going to give that person support. I'll make them look good. I'll work with them. And the fact of the matter is, it's about the firefighters and the citizens we serve. So, hey, listen, bad things are going to happen to you out there, but you got to rise above it. And I talked to my son last night about it, when I came home because I was a little pissed off. And, we took a ride, and I tried to explain to him, this stuff's going to happen in your life, and you got to push through it. So that's my last word of the day. We'll let Bobby sign off. PJ, you want to say last word?
No, I just think this is a great conversation. I think we've really covered much more than I anticipated today as far as topics, but I think it was great. I think we scratched the surface on a lot of it, and I think that's the problem with all of these topics, that we can scratch the surface and we could discuss them. And thankfully for Fire Engineering and these Google Hangouts and Blog Talk Radio, the magazine, the Fire Engineering Training Community, and FDIC, which is only 53 days away from today, we have the ability to scratch the surface on platforms like this, and then when we get everybody at FDIC, we can really dive into the topics in the classroom, the hands-on classes, the pre-conference workshops, and while we're chasing Frank on the Courage and Valor 5K run. So I think this is a great platform, thankfully, for Chief Halton and his vision to keep these going every Wednesday of the month. So, Chief, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for this great conversation. Captain, thank you for joining us. Definitely think we'll have to have you back in the future because you have some great information and knowledge that we can all learn from.
Thanks for having me.
Could you send us a link to your article so we can tweet it out to all our listeners?
Absolutely.
Because then, a lot of times this engages people and they say, hey, I want to know more about that. So PJ, as the Minister of Propaganda, will tweet out the articles, and that way we can get everybody engaged in the topic. Chief Halton, to you, sir, and thank you for your time, and thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to us today. Just two things real quick. Wonderful conversation. Can't wait to get the good captain back on again. Remember Fire Rescue Magazine, which is an incredible magazine. The editor-in-chief, Eric Roden, has done an amazing job, completely reformatted, full of tremendous education. It's free. Go to firefighterNation.com right now. Go over the subscribe deal, push a button, and you can get the best magazine in America for firefighter education. The best magazine for firefighter training, Fire Engineering. Best magazine for firefighter education, Fire Rescue Magazine, where you'll read people like Steve Mercer, you'll read Jimmy Crawford, Angela Hughes, Becky White, Tommy Kirby, Lakekamp, the Ed Corrett, Tommy Lakekamp, just the best of the best out there. Tiger Schmittendorf, I know I'm probably forgetting somebody, but amazing magazine. Please get it. And then most importantly, for everybody out there, happy birthday, Mom. 90 years old. Way to go. I love you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Stay safe.